This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
He started out as a stand-up comedian, entertaining audiences all over North America.
And then one night at Second City, during the late 80s, Patrick McKenna received the acting offer that would change his life.
Who would have thought that his twitchy nerd character as part of the Second City troupe would have him appearing on television throughout North America for the next 15 years as the lovable nephew, Harold Green, on the Red Green Show? Well, Patrick, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Okay, well, I want to know, what were you like as a kid?
Well, according to my teachers, I was clever but disruptive. According to my mother, I was just disruptive. So it really depends who you ask, but I had ADHD. I have ADHD. So I was really rambunctious as a kid. I took a lot of risks, and I was the class clown, I thought. And I was just a lot of energy.
How much of you is in the character of Harold?
Oddly enough, I'd probably say it's about 50-50. If I let all the vulnerability out that I can muster, that's a lot of Harold. And I think I just put that in there into hero worship. I just pretended every time that I saw my Uncle Red that I was meeting Elvis Presley. It was just like, this is the most exciting thing in the world. So who is my idol. So I just kind of put that energy of me into that every time. So I think every actor probably has to have some amount of themselves in there in order to justify a lot of the stuff that's written down for us.
Wow. And yeah, and actually, Pat, for our audiences, listeners and viewers, we mentioned that, wow, you had a 15-year run as the nephew, as Harold Green on the Red Green Show, and as this kind of like twitchy nerd character. And tell us about that. I mean, you were discovered at the Second City. Is that how it played out?
Yeah, I was doing that character in a sketch there, and Steve happened to come see the show one night, and he was just ending his other series, and his wife wanted to stay home with the kids and things, so he was kind of on his own, and he happened in the show, and he thought that would be a very funny thing standing beside me, because he's very visual, and the Red Green character is more of a radio comic. When it started, it was just verbal, so he thought that's what I needed, something visual. So he asked me to come, and we did a week of shows and a whole season in a week. We just taped it in the CHCH studios. I was hardwired into a chair. I could barely move. So I was wondering, I don't know, you hired me to move and I can't move, but that's the way it went. And that was the first season. And then, rightfully so, we got canceled. But the fans kept writing in. The fans wrote in all the time saying, this show is amazing. So Steve took a hockey bag into the CHCH and threw it on their desk and said, you pick any letter in there and that'll be my pitch as why we should have a second season. And it was the fans who kept the show going. So they identified with Harold in some way of the vulnerability of him. So I kind of breathed into that all the time for the seasons. It was just the idea of what's Red up to and how do I balance that with I want to hang around him, but I don't want to get killed.
Well, when you're talking about Steve, we're talking about Steve Smith, who is Red Green on the show.
Right.
Geez, I have so much. There is so much hero worship that's going to come from my hockey bag towards you during this next half hour, and we're going to get into duct tape and everything else. You just mentioned CHCH, which is Hamilton's own television station, which also gave birth to Bill Lawrence and Tiny Talent Time. Bill Lawrence, who I used to work with when he was a weatherman at Channel 5 in Toronto, a wonderful fellow. CHCH used to run All-Star Wrestling on Saturdays, and my brother and I would act that out in the basement.
Yep.
They used to run Hamilton Red Wings games.
Yeah.
With Norm something or other Norm Marshall was the host.
Norm Marshall, he lived up the street from me.
Well, there you go. And see, so like Hamilton, and then there's, of course, Amy, who's also on this podcast, although I rarely let her get a word in edgewise. Amy's out of Hamilton, Martin Short, everybody's coming out of Hamilton. But the thing about Red Green and Harold, is that they were like everybody. And that's probably why you got the the bag full of letters because everyone could identify with those guys.
It was interesting when the show came out because a lot of the large cities, be it Toronto, Montreal, Chicago, New York, they really didn't get the show very much. It was the middle of the countries that kind of said that we identify with. We get those people. We don't get New York values. We don't get LA values when you're in Saskatchewan. You know, they identified more with what Red Green was doing, the simplicity of just getting through a day, having an idea and making it work because that's all the money and ideas you have. I think that really resonated with the center of America too, because when we went to PBS, it was Idaho and Iowa and places like this that really kept the show alive. The people who, you know, work day to day for a living with their hands, it seemed to resonate more with them because we were coming out at a time when, you know, there was Seinfeld was on and Cosby and those type of shows. There was a lot of that where this really was out in another field talking to a completely different audience.
And I mean, and then so you think about, Pat, when I'm curious because you started as a stand-up comedian and then you went into acting and then you did some really dramatic roles. I mean, I think you're the first Canadian to have won 2 awards. Was it Gemini Awards for drama and comedy in the same year? Traitors and the Red Green. Was it the Red Green? Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, tell us about that.
That was, you know, it was at a time in Canada when you could do things like that because I was able to do the 2 shows and it was very difficult to do. I would do Red Green on Wednesdays and Saturdays and then Traders on Monday, Tuesdays, Thursday, Fridays. And that left Sunday to learn all the lines for both shows. So I did that for like 5 years till, you know, I just completely burned out and said, I got to take a break. And I left both shows and said, you know, I need a break here. So that kind of took me out for a little while just to regroup because it was exhausting. And the opportunity to be in a lead in both shows and then to be rewarded for it was incredible that, you know, because you're just stumbling along when you're a stand-up and a comedian. I didn't have any acting skills in the sense of I didn't go to school and learn these things. So to be complimented in any way, I just took the tribute and said thank you. And today, I just got 2 nominations for the New Screen Actors Awards today.
Wow. Congratulations. Wow.
Thank you. I just found out before I came on for both shows shot in Hamilton, Pink is In, and also Ron James show, One Man's Treasure. Wow. So it's been amazing that way that even at my age still, people appreciate it.
Can I ask you whether or not you think you 2 fellows are responsible for the whole phenomenon that is duct tape?
It certainly put it to the forefront. That's for sure. I mean, everybody kind of knew what it was. They just needed a slogan.
I don't think anyone knew what it was for, you know?
Well, you know, that's what we started out with, you know, it's more than a hair removal. It's more than, you know, it's all those things we used to say at the beginning of the show. But when we went to make the movie, we went to 3M and we said, you know, it's all about duct tape. And they said, oh, that's great. And they said, would you sponsor us? And they said, no. And then the show went really well. And they said, can we sponsor you? And we said, please. So the movie, yes, the movie is filled with free duct tape. We were just ecstatic. On a Canadian budget to get that was our biggest expense was the duct tape.
Oh, that's hilarious. Hilarious.
That again sort of harkens back to this notion that there you are. It's like 2 against the world, and you got to figure it out. And when life comes after you, you know, all you need is a roll of duct tape and you can pretty much fix and solve all of life's problems. I mean, what a great thing. It's up to you. Use your imagination, use your creativity, fix it yourself. Yeah. What a great message.
It was so simplistic that way of, you know, it's your problem, you can fix it. And sometimes it's not that big of a deal. Duct tape can fix it. It's that simple. You know, people make big deals out of things. And we were really influenced by like the Andy Griffith Show and things like that. Because when we were doing the outside things, we had no audience. In the first 2 seasons, we had no audience. So you had to just assume there was laughs there. So we just played it out. We just played the communication between each other. So when we finally got in front of a live audience in year 3, we were so ready. We already had our communication down and our rhythms and things like that. It was so much fun to step onto stage and people immediately react to us. It was like, oh, we've got something here. The audience told us everything when we started shooting in front of them. You know, we said they're never wrong. If they didn't laugh, it's something we did wrong, not them. So in between shows, we go back and fix that joke and come out and do it again the second show. And it was wonderful that way. It was such a give and take between all of us.
And Pat, did you you mentioned a couple of influences, but who really influenced you to maybe even want to be a comedian when you were a kid?
Oh, it's definitely Dick Van Dyke. I mean,
Oh,
that
Dick
was
Van Dyke. Wow.
yeah, that show was on all the time, and I loved being that everyman quality that he had. I just thought that was great, and I take that into like Cary Grant into films and Jimmy Stewart, and they're very calm, but they're also these great physical comedians, and that was something I really was able to tap into, I think, because that helped me when I had to go to the dramatic roles of now it's the portion of you that's not clumsy, it's the portion of you that's focused and accomplished, and that was easy to draw on and just keep that going, to recognize how I can compartmentalize a lot of these portions of what I want to showcase. As an actor, I've probably become a better human being because I didn't know these things. I didn't know about sharing and empathy. No one sits down and teaches you these things. You have to learn them eventually. And I learned them through acting to be a much more open person.
Hmm. So you mentioned Andy Griffith. Now you've mentioned Dick Van Dyke. Um, I mean, what about Red Fisher?
Well,
That's
he was
what
on
is
all the
it? The
time.
hunting lodge.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you grew up in the Hamilton area, you knew Red Fisher because he was on CKCO out of Kitchener all the time, every Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock. So we're all aware of him. But
Yeah.
Steve was the only one who kind of sat down and actually watched the show, because it was sort of a monotone drone, basically, about him out fishing for the day with some guy. So, you could tune at any point and there they are in a boat just fishing. It's like, that's what fishing is. That would go for 22 minutes.
He had his little place there, Scuttlebutt Lodge, and
Scuttlebutt Lodge, yeah.
maybe, I mean, a lot of it almost reminded me of like the Friendly Giant a lot. He had the little.
Yeah.
I've got my rocking chair right here behind me in this 10 by 10-inch hotel room that I'm in. But he, and he would come in and he would tell these stories, and he was again a regular guy. And I
Yeah.
hope I'm not talking, way over people's heads when I'm talking about these sort of iconic shows that were on when we were growing up. But we all, in Second City,
Yeah.
pardon my French, took the piss out of Red Fisher all the time when they had that. They had John Candy was doing a fishing
Yep.
show, and they had like the um, like these punk bands come on,
Yeah.
and Wendy O. Williams would be
That's right. Yeah.
fishing with Red Fisher, and I mean these things were, I guess you would call it Canadiana almost.
Well, and I think you can see it in the fact that we all grew up with the same experiences, that the SCTV cast, they saw that show and they reacted to it in a certain way as when I was growing up, as did Steve, everybody took a little something away from that calm 22 minutes in that boat with that guy of that's really different TV compared to everything else on the channels that's yelling and screaming for our attention. This is just quiet and coasting on a lake. And it was so simple and inexpensive that, particularly SCTV loved that kind of stuff. And it set us up grand too, because that's why I think we fit so well on PBS down in the States. Had that temperature of a PBS show that audiences could enjoy that flow. It was a very gentle experience. You didn't have to push too hard. Yeah. That was the hard line with Harold, is that he's so big and a very gentle show. You had to pick and choose when you could kind of go Barney Fife. That's in my mind. I would go, like that was the balance again of Andy Griffith having Barney Fife. I was Barney Fife in that show, So finding those moments where you could explode and then contain it out of all the excitement that's Red presented, audiences just seemed to eat it up. And again, they were live, so they told us, "Yep, that's the zone to go."
Wow. And Pat, is there any show today that sort of reminds you of the quality and or work that you did in the past? Anything close?
It's a very different time in TV right now. I don't see that kind of time they take. It seems to be that the experience has to be kind of large, more than characters these days, other than like say Larry David, but he's a character that creates the situation. The comedy walks into the normal versus does the comedy come to you or do you go to the comedy? So it's a very fine line these days. Like sitcoms don't really go that way. There are a lot of ensemble now, like I think the closest for me was Everybody Loves Raymond, but that's been off a few years now. And will that energy come back? I don't know. Even the shows I'm developing now with Ron James and I, it's very physical and it's, that type of challenge because you're demanding screen time is pretty hard these days. You got to yell pretty loud for people to look at you. it's wonderful that you can go on the internet, but so is everybody else.
Yeah.
As are we.
Yeah. So you understand completely.
How much you mentioned, well, how much improv was involved? And again, we're talking Second City gives birth to you.
It really did. I mean, I learned everything at Second City, everything. I just loved that place with all my heart. So when I got to Steve, I mean, Steve basically said, the only reason I'm an actor is so I can read my lines because no one else, I will. So he wrote the show and he liked his words. It was tight. There was no improv at all really in the show. I'd say 99.9 was all written. The only thing you could improvise would be maybe your reactions to it, how they would go. And that would set up how the next line would go. And we'd camera block it in the afternoon, but we never really heard each other deliver the lines until the audience was there. So we had no idea of what we were planning or how I heard that line or how he heard it. And we would always just surprise each other. This is the way we're going. Okay. But I knew I had to follow Red's lead. But the idea being, we've never heard each other say these words yet. And that was always the excitement with each other is, here we go.
Wow. And then Pat, the 15 years, how did it wind down? I mean, it may be obvious, but how did it wind down for you?
It was a very weird year, 2005. That's when it came off. I hurt my back tremendously, and I was in the hospital most of the year. So I got out just before we were finished filming the last segment, and I was pretty medicated, it's just so I could walk. And so the last year was a hard one for me. And then, so it was one of those years where, like, my dad died, I lost my job from Red Green, and I was turning, I think, 45. So there's one of those things where it all hit at once. It's like that. Oh boy, 2005 was a punch in the gut year because everything just ended and changed. But like Steve said, he was leaving because he was turning 60. He said, he knows an off ramp when he sees one. But I always thought, well, an off ramp always leads to an on ramp. So this is going somewhere. This is difficult to say goodbye because I love these people. I love the show, the audience. It was just the grandest experience 2 days a week to say goodbye to that and open up for what was next.
Well, that's a pretty positive attitude.
It was such a hard year that I really had to grasp that and say, because I didn't, to be honest, they said I wasn't going to come out of that year, that I wasn't supposed to make it. So every day is a gift to me, even if it looks like, oh, that's a hard time. It's like, no, I've experienced some harder times, and I would do anything to have this pain in my back today versus the alternative that was given. So it's been a ride for sure, but you really have to maintain a positive attitude. Again, that's the only thing you have. I'm not in control of acting. I'm not in control of getting the job or this or that. All I have is me. So it's got to be your attitude that you bring in, and to be able to, anything I have in life, I've got by making people laugh. And that's a pretty good life. I'm okay.
So true. And Pat, you were diagnosed, you mentioned this when we first started, you were diagnosed with ADHD, but not until you were well into your 40s. And then you became a spokesperson in Canada for it. And so did you feel like, did you know what was up? Did you feel differently? Were you more relieved knowing that you were diagnosed with it? What was that like?
The diagnosis, I did it for a documentary, and I got diagnosed within the documentary, and I kept thinking, oh man, I better have this. I better have this or I'm just a real a-hole, So thank God I shot off the charts with ADHD. But it was fantastic knowing, because it changed my life in a breath, in the sense of, oh, that explains a lot. I can forgive myself a lot. And that's what I've been doing ever since, is just kind of going out there, talking to schools and students, going, be easier on yourself. Your brain is constantly seeking dopamine. It hasn't got time to sit around and do math. It's looking for something else interesting. So it's going to be a challenge. And that part is really hard. And fortunately, I'm in an industry where you turn over jobs every 6 weeks, or you're learning a new script. So it's very ADD friendly. And I didn't know that. I was lucky enough to fall into this world and steer myself towards it because it fit. But so many of us are sitting in a cubicle wondering why our life is hell. And it's like, oh, we're in the wrong spot. Just knowing turned my life around. So I started doing speeches all over schools and everywhere, because I can say things to students that teachers can't,
right,
because of a union, because of this, because of that. But as an outside guest speaker, I can just really address what's going on and not challenge them or make anybody uncomfortable, because I tell my story. And then they can see themselves through my experiences of what it was like in school, what it was like to be 9, if that's who I'm talking to at 9-year-olds, or if I'm talking to teenagers, where was I at that point? Likely they are, because that's just the stages of life of where you go through. But if you're also running at top speed in your head, it's even more exhausting. But it changed my life immediately for the better, knowing.
Do you find this work, sharing your story with others, fulfilling?
It's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done. I mean, laughter is wonderful, but it goes right to the next joke. Whereas I've had people come up to me and say, I've never finished a book in my life. And I saw your DVD and I sat down and I finished a book for the first time in my life. And things like that. At 80 years old, people coming up going, I know now. Now I know. And mothers coming up going, my son's 34 and he won't get off the couch. Thank you so much for your DVD. Things like that. It goes into a person's home and changes their life. And I mean that wholeheartedly. Just knowing gives you the ability to go, oh, I'm not a bad person. I'm not lazy and crazy. I have this, this way of thinking. I'm demanding with dopamine that's just not there. So you got to find ways, even if it's a little bit. Sometimes I just raise my voice to be a little more excited, and that's enough to make me happy for a little while. That's all I needed was a little bit of excitement. You don't have to jump off a bridge.
Do that yourself. It's like,
yeah,
hey.
Yeah. And that really was Harold for the Red Green show. Is like every time before the show started, be like, here we go, and it'd be boom. I'm in that state. It's fantastic.
Speaking of which, do you still do voiceovers? I just heard the little voice.
Yeah. I've been doing some cartoons because when COVID hit, you really couldn't go to the studios and shows shut down and everything. So I was doing a couple of cartoons, and you could do them from home in my studio. So it was great, and I got nominated for a daytime Emmy Award with Sesame Street. I was doing a cartoon for them. Fantastic. So again, it's like you're sitting in the closet in your home and you're getting nominated for Emmy Awards. It's like, this industry is fantastic.
That's great.
Speaking of this industry, and we're really flying the maple leaf pretty high today with our conversation. So I want to ask you not so much about the state of Canadian television at the moment, but your show became a cult show and remains a cult show, as did SCTV late on Saturday nights. Yeah. There are a few others out there: Trailer Park Boys, Shores. Shoresy is one that I really really enjoy because I love hockey. Corner Gas, obviously.
Letterkenny, I guess.
Letterkenny. Yeah. What do you think of all these shows that are out there on the periphery but have such a dedicated following?
I love it, and to be honest, I think Red Green really opened the door for that. It showed there was an audience for it. So when people like Brent Butt went into CTV and said, here's my idea, you weren't fighting uphill anymore. There was a mountain there with somebody on top already going, he has all that audience. And there's a whole other way to do these jokes other than the way he's doing them, which is, Corner Gas answered that. They did like more of a sitcom format, and same with Letterkenny. They developed like a rhythm and a language, basically, it's different, but at the same time, it's down home. I don't know anybody like Letterkenny, but I think I know them all. There's something interesting when you just see people in an environment that's comfortable, that invites you in. The Lodge was like that with Red Green. Corner Gas was like that. They invite you in to be part of it, as opposed to sit back and watch us. Come on in. That's a different experience with TV, and it's hard to find an audience like that.
Well, for all my friends who are Shoresy fans, I've read that, for example, people are actually making a pilgrimage to Sudbury now just to come on in to the environment that the Coach Shoresy sort of brings up every week, and it's it's a diverse show. These shows are quite incredible, and I was fishing for you to say. Not Red Fisher, but Red Green was basically, the godfather of all of this, and I kind of
think he is. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, because the first few years we got canceled everywhere. We've been on every network in the country because they just didn't believe in it. So we were on YTV for a while because Harold was childlike, so they put him on. We got a year on there. Steve bought a year on Global. He bought all the commercials and aired it because no one else was going to air it. Did it that way. we were on Comedy Network for a while, and finally CTV kicked in, and then the folks from Air Farce, oddly enough, said, this Red Green show would be a perfect lead-in. And CBC said, we really don't like that show. That's not for us. And they said, we really like that show. That's our audience. And they had enough power then to say, well, all right, we'll try it. But if they don't stay, away they go. And we were there for 9 years. We finished up there.
Wow. Talk about perseverance, right? I mean, people from the, looking in, outside looking in would think, oh, this is, easy breezy. This had a great run, and they don't really realize the challenges that go with, producing and making something happen. And actually, to that point, Pat, you were a host of the Canadian Comedy Hall of Fame just this February.
Yeah.
And my friend Joe Beaudelet was being awarded, which I was so happy to hear that, to see that. He was amazing. He was amazing comic writer. Do you feel in Canada that we champion comedians? I mean, because people when they make it, they go to the South. So what do you think about Canadian comedy now and the artists that are here, the talent?
Well, the talent is fantastic because now they have a beginning, middle, and end to what they're trying to do, which is before you're always kind of running around trying to get CBC to say yes for your show, but you don't need that now. People are making their own. So the talent is there. And out of that, we're getting better writers, better directors, better light. Everybody's learning it on the ground level, bringing it to it. And then CBC or somebody will come in and say, oh, we like it so much, let's put it on Gem now that you've done all the work. There's nobody there to champion people along anymore that used to be there. People who nothing against people in the chairs now because they've obviously earned them, but there was just a different vocabulary at that time. There was more of a yes than there was a no. Because there's just so many of us now. It's no, you're this, you're not. Let me see what numbers you have on Facebook before we can talk about comedy, as opposed to here's the product. Do you believe in it as much as I believe in it? And should we see if other people believe in this too, as opposed to numbers telling us? So I find now too that it's harder because I'm an old white guy, so it's really hard for me to complain. But what I've noticed is in this change, we've thrust people to the front of the line who aren't quite ready yet. They haven't had the experience yet to be there, and they may get beat up. Some will go through, but they may get beat up and then leave. And that'd be a shame because they have obviously the talent and the desire. So having an outlet these days is the most difficult part for people to get their skills up and running. I find that some of the comedy is sloppy. I find they're throwing away lines. I don't hear a presentation. I find things are being filmed too dark. Comedy should be a little bit brighter, a little lighter, so you can enjoy the day as opposed to, that was funny. Yeah. It's a different experience we're having now that everything has to be sly and dirty sex and swearing and this. Not that that's bad. It's just that it all goes one way. And that's what people learn. So when they are ready to develop, they only are able to develop what they know. And so it's getting a lesser common, we're to the lowest common denominator versus the highest. At Second City was always work to the top of your intelligence. And I don't see that a lot anymore in elementary comedy. I know it's going to get better because people will have more time to do that. The writing is certainly better because now there's Humber School of Comedy. People are learning how to do those type of things. So the potential is there. We need people in the chairs to start supporting us a little bit more. I'm not a big fan of when people leave Canada and then come back and they get to the front of the line and they get their own show because they left. That really bothers me. Like there's an industry here that we keep going. And for people to come back and jump in the front of the line, I think that's really adolescent thinking from our higher ups. That we're missing opportunity. We have Britain right in front of us showcasing us how to do this and make celebrities and stars out of our industry. Australia does it. The Commonwealth does this except Canada. We're so intimidated by America and, America. Please, we don't have to be like that, right now, yelling, screaming, fighting, division. It's not what we want to be. We don't have to be. So it's a real opportunity for us to do more things like Shoresy, like Letterkenny, like Corner Gas, and the shows that CBC's developing. Baron von Sketch is fantastic. Those ladies are just top of the game right now. there's so much strength coming out of here if we showcase it properly.
Huh. Well, you've pretty much described the TV business to a T. Our little time is up, and I want to, but I want to go out on a positive note. You were just pleading, as we all do, for people to believe in talent and upcoming talent. Each week we ask the same question, and we're now going to ask you. The other thing is what you were just saying about how negative everything is, and yet there's a Red Green Show still out there.
Yeah.
Never took that bait. So Harold, why do you believe in people?
I believe in people because they stand right before you. They open up their hearts to you, and it's up to me to accept it or slap it. And I think accepting a heart is better. It beats in your hands nicely.
That was great.
Thank you so much. What a
Thank you,
delightful,
Pat.
what a delightful half an hour. So great to have met you. And I'm going to go start watching old shows on YouTube now.
Me too.
Good.
Thanks,
Thanks
Pat.
so much. Alrighty,
Thank you,
all the
Pat.
best.
Thanks.
Take care.
Kev, one thing that I'm optimistic about is what Pat said about Canada and the talent that comes out of Canada, and that there are real opportunities to keep the talent within, our country. And I think that there's an optimistic view about that. Whereas typically we think that, okay, if in order to make it, we have to go south. And so he kind of reassured my thinking that no, we can develop right here and keep it within the family, so to speak. And I feel a little more encouraged by what he said.
Well, of course, you're talking to someone who did move south early on in his career.
What's the matter with you?
But he did so for his own reasons. But I just want to commend the positivity of the Red Green Show, the positivity of this whole past half hour, and I think he's absolutely right. There is a place in our world for shows like the Red Green Show that are not sarcastic or filled with double entendres or filled with guns. There's a place for that kind of hopeful little program. And here's a good segue. This is a hopeful little program too. So if you want to subscribe to Believe in People, we'll believe in you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.